Little Pilgrim's Progress, written by Helen L. Taylor, envisioned and illustrated by Ch.1. For little pilgrims, long is the journey, good is the King. Part 1, Christian. Chapter 1, Little Christian hears of the celestial city. Little Christian lived in a great city called Destruction. Its streets were full of very young animals who laughed and played all day long. This was the summertime, when the sun was shining and the city looked bright and pleasant. On the rainy days in winter, the children did not feel so happy, and they would sometimes be glad to sit quietly and listen to stories. Now and then, strangers would come to the city for a little time, and these kind visitors always tried to make friends with the children and were willing to tell them stories whenever they would listen. There is a beautiful country, they would say, far away from this city. A very good and wise king rules over it, who loves little creatures dearly. The prince to whom your city belongs is wicked and cruel, and he hates our good king. But one day, an army will come from the king's country to fight against your wicked prince, and this city will be burned, and all the townsfolk in it will be killed. Then the children asked, "What will become of us?" And the wise stranger always answered, "You must leave this city now, while you are young and strong, and travel to the king's country. In the celestial city where he lives, you will be quite safe." Little Christian heard this many times, and he often thought about it. But whenever he said to his playfellows, "Shall we go to Celestial City?" they laughed at him and told him that it was only a make-believe story about the king, and no city would be better or safer than their own. But little Christian felt quite sure that the strangers had spoken the truth. And one day he found an old book in which were written the very same things about the king and the celestial city and their own wicked prince and his city, which would certainly be burned when the king came. He showed the book to his companions, but they laughed all the more, and they said, "That book was written hundreds of years ago. This is of no use to us now. The king's army has never come, and very likely it never will. At any rate, we may as well play as long as we can." But little Christian did not want to play. He felt tired and unhappy, and he sat down and wondered whether he could find a way to Celestial City by himself. He was such a little rabbit that he was afraid he might be lost if he tried to make the long journey alone. He opened his book again, and he read a beautiful story in it about the king's own son, who had once visited the city of destruction and had spoken kindly to the young animals in the street, saying, "Let the little children come unto me." If he were only here now, thought little Christian, perhaps he could take me back with him. But I could never go all that long way alone. Then the tears came into his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. They fell upon his whiskers and his fur and his clothes. And as he brushed them away, he saw how soiled and dusty his little suit had become. He had worn it a long time. and he played so much that the cloth was getting quite thin and shabby. This added to his sadness, for he thought that if he did find his way to the celestial city, his clothes would be worn out long before he got there. And how could he expect the king to receive a little rabbit dressed in nothing but rags? At last he took up his book and went home, and his nanny wondered why he looked so tired and sad. He told her that he would like to go to the celestial city, but she laughed as his playmates had done, and said, "You are a silly boy. There is no celestial city. If you go wandering along the roads after those strangers, you will get lost." So little Christian went to bed and cried until he fell asleep.